Pep Guardiola has just masterminded a sensational win for Manchester City over Chelsea, beating them by 3-1, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at how they did it, including a look at the tactics involved that helped Man City get a crucial win over Chelsea. To best understand what Manchester City did so well to be able to expose and exploit Chelsea, we need to understand what Chelsea were really going for from a defensive point of view from the get-go. So we have them here set up on this right-hand side, and what they generally want to do was condense the spaces between Enzo Fernandez, Moises Caicedo and Chelsea's back four. To do this, they squeezed the pitch, both from the front two but also from the back four, and this meant that the spaces in between these lines were just not there, and it made it very difficult for players from Manchester City to be able to exploit that. Man City are one of the best teams, or were one of the best teams, at being able to exploit those half spaces between the midfielders and the defence, putting balls into this area to then recycle round and then push it through that defensive back line. But with Chelsea playing so narrow, with them playing so tight and compact, it meant that those spaces just weren't there, which meant that Manchester City needed to opt for something a little bit different. And this is where we look at Manchester City. This is the new way that Manchester City decided to go forwards. So, first of all, we need to take a look at their fullbacks, because Guardiola and Matheus Nunes had really high aggressive positions, and these were starting positions. They didn't walk there. This is how the side sets up. This is the Manchester City back four. It's really high, really aggressive, essentially creating a bowl shape around this Chelsea midfield and this entire Chelsea side, and this is because they didn't want to try and go through the centre of the pitch, because Chelsea are very good defensively in between the lines, so they're not going to use the lines. Instead, they drop their midfield three of Gundogan, Kovacic and Bernardo Silva just in front of that Chelsea attacking line, and it meant that Chelsea needed to make a decision. Do they A, go and press, which meant that Palmer and Jackson go forwards, but there's always a spare man in Gundogan? Do they B, have more players go press, which meant that Sancho would go forwards, but that's then exposing Guardiola and Nunes? Or do they C, drop off to try and make sure they stay nice and compact in front of that back line? The problem with doing option C is that it then meant that Guardiola and Nunes had a load of space. Because of how compact and narrow Chelsea were, it meant that although they were defending the centre of the pitch, defending those half spaces, it gave Man City a load of encouragement to go down the sides. You then getting good options from Nunes making infield runs. The same can be said for Guardiola, trying to beat that offside trap. Chelsea playing a very high line meant that these runs were occasionally going to have a lot of impact, a lot of danger, and all of a sudden Manchester City started to gain a huge control of the match, even though they found themselves 1-0 down due to a defensive error. And it's this back five essentially, or back five essentially, that allowed for this control. It allowed for this domination, and Chelsea couldn't really do anything about it, because although Palmer and Jackson would want to press, there'd always be a spare man near the person on the ball, and it meant that they were able to recycle possession pretty quickly and then try to go through those channels, moving the ball infield occasionally to then recycle it back out. And all of a sudden Man City started to tinker with Chelsea. All of a sudden Manchester City started to move Chelsea around, and then that started to create some major problems. And this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So, from a Manchester City point of view, what have you got? You've got the midfield three that's in front of this Chelsea defensive line. You've got your back two in the two centre-backs, but what we need to really take a notice of are the two full-backs. Here they are on both the left-hand side and the right-hand side. We're going to really keep our eye on to Guardiola, because he's going to make a bending run in behind this Chelsea back line. On Chelsea's perspective, what can we notice? We notice that they're really compact and they're really narrow. They're also playing a really high line. It's a really good defensive unit, but Manchester City are going to try and overload that, and they're going to overload it through, you guessed it, those two fullbacks. Although Chelsea seemed quite comfortable in defending against Manchester City's attacking three in Marmoush, Foden and Haaland, what they're not prepared for are the runs in beyond from Man City's two main fullbacks, and it's this overload that is going to cause them so many problems later down the line and right now. The overloading of both sides of the pitch, both on the defensive side but also on the offensive side, is something that Man City really catered towards, and it exposed Chelsea on a number of occasions, and it was something that Chelsea just couldn't account for. They didn't know how to defend these runs, and it just made a whole load of problems for them later down the line. As you can see, Guardiola is making a fantastic movement beyond this Chelsea back line. Kovacic is playing a more direct pass over the top. And then that's another thing that we need to notice. Look at the high line of Chelsea. Look how far back Noni Madueke has been pushed because of the run of Guardiola. Look at how high this Chelsea back line has been pushed up, exposing that space and beyond. And it was that space that Pep Guardiola wanted these two fullbacks to run into, because they were the only players that weren't going to be marked. Moving around this Chelsea defensive unit instead of trying to go through them. It really was a genius tactic from Guardiola. And then when we look at the way that the ball is played, you've got Guardiola able to take that on the run. He chests it down and then he drives towards goal. And if it wasn't for an unfortunate touch, Man City would probably have been one goal to the good at the very least. Of course, it would have been an equaliser, but the way they went forwards was ingenious. Pep Guardiola spoke earlier on in the week about a more direct style of football being the future of the way that football is played, and I believe this is what he was talking about. I believe this is what he's been working on. So you've got this midfield three, you've got the ability to play passes over the top. Chelsea have a very good defensive unit, but notice the positions of Man City's most potent attacking players. Phil Foden on the last line of defence, Erling Haaland on the last line of defence, Marmoush on the last line of defence. But then you've got the added overloads of Matheus Nunes and Guardiola. A brilliant thing about the system as well is that they are defensively solid as well. 5 defensive players, 5 attacking players. It brings balance to this Manchester City side, but it keeps an overload on this channel and on this channel, leaving Man City with a better attacking outlet, just in a different avenue. Again, rather than going through this Chelsea side, they go around them, and it's through the fullbacks that really facilitated this brilliant move. And this is exactly how Manchester City's first goal came about. So let's take a look at a couple of things. You've got Gundogan here. He's about to receive a pass. But let's note where Manchester City's real potent attacking threat is. You've got Marmoush dropping into a space. You've got Phil Foden dropping in. And you've got Reece James following that run. Which means that Noni Madueke is now marking Guardiola. This seems fine. But notice the position of Matheus Nunes as well. Just on the outside of Cucurella. He's meant to be marked by Sancho, but he's not really. So you've got fullback and fullback, and they're overloading this Chelsea back line because they're going to be making runs into these spaces. It's so well done. Again, when you've got Gundogan playing this pass, you've got Bernardo Silva out on this side, he's covering for a position that Matheus Nunes is, and it's just all about rotation. But again, the idea is utilising those fullbacks to make runs in beyond to best expose this high Chelsea back line. The ball gets played over the top by Gundogan, again, towards an on-running Matheus Nunes. It's onside because of the deep run of Guardiola, Madueke keeping him onside, and it means that this play is on. So as he drives towards the goal, Matheus Nunes now has a free amount of space to run into. It's about him taking the ball and muscling Cucurella away from this position. He has enough strength to be able to take it and try to take a shot. Gets deflected, but who is the next following player? It's what we've been talking about this entire video, the other fullback, the left back in Guardiola. He's now able to take that and go and score. You've got one fullback essentially giving a good opportunity to another fullback, and it's all through isolating those channels, overloading those spaces, and making sure that they can run in beyond into that space, going around rather than going through. It is brilliant. Now this is where it gets really interesting and really important, and this is why I believe Pep Guardiola outclassed Enzo Maresca in this particular match, why Man City outclassed Chelsea, and why Pep Guardiola has essentially masterminded a brilliant win against this Chelsea side. We need to talk about the idea of conditioning, the idea of repeating something to an extent that it influences the opposite side to be able to do something that you want them to do. So in short, when we think about Man City, we think about that back five holding and maintaining that possession, making sure that Chelsea weren't able to press them. So at half-time, when that goal goes in, Enzo Maresca decides to make a change, and the change he makes is this. Instead of opting for that compact midfield four and that midfield two, instead of making sure they're a compact defensive shape, they change their defensive unit and they go for a man-marking pressing system. They want to press press Man City, I should say, into their back third, meaning that you've got Enzo Fernandez pushing onto Bernardo Silva, Caicedo pushing onto Gundogan, Nkunku pushing onto Kovacic. And here's where the really clever and genius bit comes in. I think Pep Guardiola either knew this was going to happen or conditioned Chelsea and Enzo Maresca into doing it himself. Because immediately what you found was you were forcing 1v1 situations for Erling Haaland onto Chalobah, for Colwill onto Foden, and for Reece James onto Marmoush. Now for Reece James and Marmoush, okay, Reece James wins that battle. Colwill gets dragged in field continuously by Phil Foden. And what ended up happening was that Chalobah was isolated with Erling Haaland on a number of occasions, allowing Haaland to spin into these spaces continuously. Now I believe that Pep Guardiola knew this would be the reaction that Enzo Maresca had, and in doing so instructed the likes of Ederson, who was on this side, and Haaland to be able to go long and win those duels, win those 50-50s, hit these spaces, hit these areas. And it meant that not only you turning around this Chelsea one-man press, the 1v1 press, you're also isolating them into scenarios they don't want to be, forcing those 1v1 battles, knowing that your main striker is going to have a physical advantage over most of the centre-backs in the Premier League. It was a genius masterstroke that turned this game on its head, and this is why Pep Guardiola outclassed Enzo Maresca. And that conditioning and that tactical change created this. So you've got the build-up to Manchester City's second goal. You've got Enzo Fernandez onto Bernardo Silva. You've got the likes of Caicedo pushing onto Gundogan. And you've got Nkunku onto the likes of Mateo Kovacic. Now, at this moment in time, Man City cannot play out. It's just not possible. You cannot go through that midfield. Look how high these Chelsea players are, pressing up against this Manchester City defensive line. You cannot do that. But what it gives you now is the ability to go long to Erling Haaland. And that's exactly what Ederson does. Look at the positioning of Haaland onto Chalobah. Look at the positioning of Colwill. Remember, this is your defensive pairing. It's just nowhere near each other. You've got Cucurella in no man's land because he's trying to press up against Mateus Nunes. You've got Phil Foden drifting into midfield, and that brings out Colwill. You've then got the idea for Marmoush to run in beyond, but what we need to pay attention to and keep our focus on is Erling Haaland and onto Chalobah. Because as this spins and as Erling Haaland gets Chalobah turned, you've got real problems. I feel sorry for Sanchez because I think he's going to get a lot of critics here. But I actually think coming out for it or attempting to was the right thing. I just don't think he runs back quickly enough. It's a mistake either way you look at it, but I do feel quite sorry for him. Erling Haaland manages to get onto the end of it. Now, what you cannot do if you're Chalobah right here is allow him to get onto his left foot. You need to understand the position of your goalkeeper, and to a certain extent I feel sorry for Chalobah as well because he slips over trying to cover for Haaland going this way. Haaland gets onto his stronger foot and ends up chipping the goalkeeper, chipping Sanchez in pretty brilliant fashion. But of course it's really unfortunate for the goalkeeper, it's really unfortunate for Chalobah who ends up falling over, but it's brilliantly executed by Haaland, and again it's masterfully organised and orchestrated by the brilliant Pep Guardiola. And it was so nice, Manchester City did it twice. Again, let's take a look at this. It's essentially a carbon copy. You've got Caicedo onto Gundogan, you've got Nkunku covering for Kovacic, and you've got Enzo Fernandez onto Bernardo Silva. Again, you can't play through this midfield who's trying to drop. You can't really play out to the wide areas, so what are you going to do? You're going to go long. Ederson is going to play that ball long once more, and you're going to hit the likes of Kevin De Bruyne, who is being marked by Gusto right here. Gusto's been subbed off for Reece James, and it's incredibly crucial that Gusto wins this header. It just so happens that he does not, and it gets played over to Erling Haaland, who is currently being marked by, yep, you guessed it, Levi Colwill right here. So as Colwill is here and he's marking Haaland, you need to make sure that he cannot get onto it. Notice the run of Phil Foden here being marked by Trevor Chalobah. He's going to make that run in beyond as well. But as the ball gets played over from Kevin De Bruyne, it's really, really dangerous for Chelsea because you're turning them again. You're utilising that space, the space they've tried to really gain onto Man City. Look at the amount of Chelsea players in Man City's half. That leaves space exposed because Chelsea are goal down at this point. Haaland manages to hold off Colwill. And then it's about this blind run from Phil Foden behind Trevor Chalobah. Haaland plays the ball around pretty perfectly. I mean, this pass right here is just sensational. It's world class, honestly. The way he's holding up the play, he's playing through Phil Foden, and then it's all about the quality of Phil Foden, whether he's got that speed, whether he's got that determination. He, of course, has the quality to be able to take this home and finish in pretty perfect style and put Man City 3-1 up. Honestly, guys, this was an absolute masterclass by Man City and Pep Guardiola. Pep taking one over Enzo Maresca. It was absolutely sensational. But of course, I want to know what you think in the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts on both sides and how you saw the game. I would love to hear from you, so please do let me know. Thank you ever so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new, and I hope to see you in the next one. But until then, my friends, take care.